Basically, we are here to give you the chance to ask whatever questions you wish to ask. My colleagues and I will share dealing with the questions. That's it. So the floor is yours. You see, that's what I want. Oh, I thought you said, no, it's very clear. Oh, yes, I thought our media people would do that. Okay. I thought there was somebody to facilitate, yeah.
Thank you, Chief Justice Zondo. It's Kenny Mapanga from SABC News Politics Desk. So there are quite a couple of matters that we are anticipating to see before the Concord. You've already addressed this issue of the attack on the judiciary. Of course, all eyes are going to be on that Section 89 panel report court challenge of the Phala Phala saga. Of course, many comments have been made in the public domain, casting aspersions on you as the Chief Justice, looking at various factors such as the President appointing you to this post despite another recommendation by the JSC. Do you feel the need to not sit over this matter when it does come to the Constitutional Court to protect the judiciary from these aspersions that might be cast, as they've already decided on the outcome of that matter before it's even been brought to the Concord? Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice, and to the judges all here present. And thank you for, my name is Mbegezeli Benjamin, and I'm from Judges Matter. And thank you for the presentation earlier of the Judicial Annual Report. And a lot of my questions were actually answered in the Q&A session earlier, but there are a few that I still have. One of which is, you mentioned that SACE did a training course on judicial wellness. But I do recall a couple of judiciary days ago, there was a program that was mentioned, a formal program, and I think it was headed by Judge President Musi. Is that program still existing? Is it being used? And what's the take-up of that judicial wellness program? And as you know, judicial wellness is such an important part of the work that judges do. The second question, it arises, I think, from just seeing you sitting down, which is that the panel before us only has men, and it probably reflects the leadership of our judiciary. Are you, as the Chief Justice, as the head of the judiciary, and the leadership as a collective, are you concerned about this state of affairs, and what practical measures are you taking to ensure that you meet Section 174 of the Constitution? It says the judiciary must broadly reflect that South Africa is a majority black and a majority woman country.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. It's Komotso Modise from Eyewitness News. I just wanted to ask, with regards to the reporting on the district courts, I think firstly I wanted to know, do you believe that the report that you've delivered today is a fair representation of the judiciary and our legal system without those numbers or all of the data from the district courts as a result of the ICT issues? Is it a fair representation of what's on the ground? Majority of South Africans interact first with the district courts. That's where most people are processed. So can you say that, I mean, it looks like a very good report, but without those numbers, is it a fair representation? And then I wanted to ask, are there any efforts being made now? It's the second year running where we don't have those numbers from the district courts. Are there any efforts being made to gather that data, and do we know when we will have it? Secondly, as a person who spends a lot of the time in the courts, day in, day out, the issue of generators and load shedding is a huge one. Is there a budget or something that is being put in place to address that in the year to come? I think it was very interesting to hear that the Labour Court, the Land Claims Court, only got their generator in November. By then, we were already having load shedding every single day. So are we budgeting for that going forward? Is there a plan being made? Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was 3 people who asked questions, but the questions were not 3. Let me start with the first question, I think, which was about whether I will sit in a particular matter. When a litigant before a court has an objection to a particular matter being heard by a particular judge, that litigant has a right to apply for that judge to recuse themselves. Now, I don't know if there's anybody who would like me not to sit in such a matter if it was to be heard, but I don't want to prejudge what will happen when an application is made. So if and when there's an application made for me to recuse myself, I will consider it at that time and take a position. That's the first one. Then Mbegezeli asked about 2 questions. Well, Judge President Musi is here. I'm going to give him a chance to deal with the judicial wellness question, and then I will deal with Mr. Mbegezeli's second question. JP?
And the policy inter alia states that wellness must be integrated with all SAJ's courses. To that extent, whenever we have ongoing judicial training, we have a session on judicial wellness. We have partnered with the Pan-African Psychological Society under the leadership of Professor Seth Cooper. So they give us the necessary resources in terms of professionals to assist us with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. Well, the other question that Mbegezeli asked relates to us here being men only. But what he didn't appreciate is that there are other leaders of the judiciary who are not here, but who are there, who are women. So as you would have heard, I just said other heads of court must come. And it so happened that men came, but otherwise they are here. So, but apart from that, issues of representation of women is an issue that are issues that are very close to my heart, and we have to do whatever we can to make sure that we raise the level of representation of women at all levels in the judiciary, including the leadership. I think I was speaking at the launch of the Aspirant Women Judges program about mid-January, when I talked about the challenges that we have in terms of at leadership level in terms of women in the judiciary. So more needs to be done, and we'll continue to try and do that because we would like to achieve the right level. And then Khomotso, district courts, is this report, or is it Khomotso? But there was a question whether this report, whether I believe that the report is a fair representation of the situation, given that the district courts are not there. Obviously, it can't be a fair representation of the whole picture if there is a level which is not catered for. It's mostly regrettable, but we decided that we would report on those courts on which we could report. And hopefully next time we have another report, the issue of the district courts will have been sorted out. It's a pity that even this year they are not there. One will have to really chase everybody to make sure that for next time they are there. Okay, I think the other question about any efforts being made that related to the district courts. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, load shedding, what was the question? Oh, the generators. Oh. Well, there are two attempts that are made in regard to, where possible, attempts are being made to try and see whether the certain courts can be, arrangements can be made so that they are not load-shedded. But there are difficulties in trying to get that for every court. And there are attempts to make sure that wherever possible, generators are bought. But also, I'm not sure that there would be enough budget to buy generators for all the courts. But the issue of the disruptions that load shedding has on the operations of courts is a very serious one. And efforts are
Hi, I can't see the Chief Justice. I'm a bit short. Hi, Chief Justice. Hi, judges.
Yes.
Everybody. My name is Franny Rabkin. I'm from the Sunday Times.
Yes.
Chief Justice, I've got a very long memory, and I want to follow up on a question that I asked you at the last judicial day.
Did I try to avoid it or what?
You didn't try to avoid it. You sent me to the Secretariat of the JSC, which I duly did, and I never got my answers. So I'm back again.
I seem to think I remember what the question was about the JCC and complaints.
Yes.
Is that right?
It is right.
Oh,
You've
okay.
also got a very long memory, Chief Justice. Just to remind you a bit more on the detail, if you recall, I was talking about the JSC annual reports and the fact that the way the JSC annual reports are presented, you get a picture of the reports that came in that year and how those reports for that year are dealt with. But there's no indication of the reports that came the years before, what had happened to them. So you don't get a complete picture at all in terms of the turnaround times, in terms of reports that have not been dealt with in the space of 1 year. And we can't benchmark anything as the public. We can't see what happens to a report that takes longer than a year, which I think we know is a lot of them, except for the ones that are dealt with quickly because they're frivolous or whatever. And it's very hard to really get a picture of the work that's being done in terms of judicial accountability in that respect. And I think if you look at the Act, the Section 6 of the Act requires that report to say, I'm just trying to find the wording. It says, information regarding all matters dealt with by the JCC. Now, from what I can see, that should include where complaints have not been finalized within that year, what's happening with them. So my question is, well, what I'm putting to you, Chief Justice, is that those reports are not a proper reflection of the work that the JCC is doing and are not enabling us to actually get any idea and to be able to assess that work. I can tell you as a journalist, every time I write a story about any complaint before the JCC, I get emails from people saying, I sent a complaint to the JCC a year ago, 2 years ago, nothing happened, I haven't heard from them. And we don't know what complaints come to the JCC. We don't know what happened to them. We can't follow them up. The one that I've been following, just because it was a very public one, was the complaint that was made against the former Chief Justice about that speech he made about vaccines. Every time I check in, nothing's happened with it. That's one, but there could be many more, and we simply don't know. So I don't want you to send me back to the Secretariat. I want you to please answer my question this time, Chief Justice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let me answer this question now. Well, thank you for coming back to raise the question. I remember the question very well. I can tell you that I believe I did talk to somebody about the issue and said that we need to change the way we report on JCC matters to take care of exactly what you are talking about. I just can't remember who I talked to. I understand completely the concerns you raise. I do want us to report adequately on them. I may be mistaken, but I think I had indicated when you raised the question last year that if you didn't find joy with the Secretariat, you must come back to me. But I guess you'll tell me I've come back to you now. No, I'm very keen that we address your concern. If you don't mind, just so that I don't forget, if you don't mind, please write to me directly and just mention this concern and that you raised it here. That will just serve as something that will remind me we are going to do something about it. Okay.
Chief Justice, I have a follow-up linked to Franny's question about just the judicial misconduct system. Have you, as someone who's been intimately involved in the system, have you maybe considered changing the system in certain ways? One of the most practical ways is just the composition of the JCC, which is made up almost exclusively of permanently sitting judges. So Justice Zondi, Justice Dambuza have to sort of divide themselves between the huge work that is involved at the SCA and also find time to deal with some of these misconduct complaints. Is it something that you've considered, and would you put this as a proposal? And then I have two more questions. One of them is also a follow-up to this, which is that at your interview for Chief Justice last year, I think it was Commissioner Tsepe and Commissioner Shabangumdawe who raised a concern that the judiciary doesn't have an anti-sexual harassment policy. And if I recall correctly, and I'm sorry if I misquote you, you said it's something you'll raise at the Heads of Court Forum, and some of the people who also participated in these interviews would be involved in that kind of conversation. My question is, has that conversation happened? And if it has happened, what has been the progress in terms of finalizing an anti-sexual harassment policy in the judiciary?
I think maybe let me answer them one by one rather than let them accumulate. Composition of the JCC. You raise a very important matter. Soon after I became Deputy Chief Justice and I was given the task of effectively running the JCC, I discovered that one, the relevant chapter of the Judicial Service Act that deals with complaints against judges is very complicated. And actually, I took time, set aside time to try and understand it. And that took quite some time. And ultimately, I took the view that some of the ways in which it was implemented at the time were not in accordance with the Act. But that was simply because it's complicated, you know. But I was able, after really spending some time on it, to understand how it's supposed to work, and I prepared certain documents that would help anyone who would be applying it understand it. At least they would have a chance to see how I understood it and see whether they agreed or not, you know. And for example, that system has a role for heads of courts, and then it has a role for JCC members. Up to that point, I don't think the heads of court had been used regularly for purposes of disposing of complaints. But after I had identified their role, I raised the issue with the then Chief Justice, and with the heads of courts. We had a discussion in a meeting, and I said, well, all of you guys will have to get involved because there's a role for you in this system. Some matters should be sent to you and you deal with them. Others need members of the JCC, and they embraced that. And since then, the heads of court play a very important role in relation to disposing of complaints. But also, and I made a document available to them which explained how I understood it. And the feedback I got was that a lot of heads of court found it very useful to deal with, to understand the act. But one of the things I discovered was not necessarily just the one you talk about, but also that the limitation of numbers in terms of members of the JCC is problematic. The kind of system that I think we should have is a system where there could be a number of judges who are members of the JCC, not just 4 or 5, so that if the load increases, you make use of others. But also there should be a provision that enables the chairperson of the JCC to designate somebody to act, so to speak, in a particular matter. Maybe it's a matter that needs to be dealt with much more quicker than others or whatever. You can just bring in a judge, whether it's a retired judge or a serving judge, to act. And in that way, you ease the load on members, because as you say, if they are serving members, they have got other work, and their courts are quite busy. But we do have retired judges who get involved in the JCC. At the moment, Justice Kabinde is one of them. Some time back, Justice Muchapelo was one of them. So as to try and assist. But there's a view that we should make use more of retired judges because they would have the time. Of course, I think that's good, but some of the retired judges are quite busy. So I think what is very important is that the burden should be spread over a number of people. So there is a need for the Act to be changed to facilitate this. So I think at some stage the JSC might need to look at it and make recommendations that it be changed so that we have a system that's flexible and that's easy to work with. Thank you. And then the anti-sexual harassment policy, you are right, that issue was raised. The current DCJ also talked about it in her interview. Let me say that after the interviews, or in due course, I mean, the interviews happened when I was busy with the report of the commission, but at some stage after I'd finished the report, I reflected on the issue, and I planned to discuss it with the DCJ after she took office, because I was thinking that it might be a good idea to set up a committee that would be led by her to look into the need for a sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment policy and the formulation thereof, if there's a need. But after she had arrived, I thought I should give her time to get settled a little bit. You remember she started in September, and but I've only been able to raise it with her recently. So I've raised it with her. There is a committee that has just been put together. She is the chairperson of that committee. There is a document that I think that committee, which is recently appointed, will probably be one to let me see. So there is some work that is going to be done. It didn't happen as quickly as it should have, but it's being attended to.
Thank you. It's Komoto again. Just a quick one from me. I know that your target, the target for the finalization of matters is 12 months. And we know that as it stands, I'm certain it's nowhere, we're not meeting that target. Do we know where we are currently, just on average, how long it's taking for the finalization of matters at both high and lower courts?
I'm sorry, at which courts?
Both high courts and lower courts. What is the turnaround time as it stands now for the finalization of matters?
I think you may be having in mind criminal matters, because that's the one in terms of 12 months is mentioned. Let me not do all the talking. Anyone who wants to deal with that?
12 months remain the target that we have identified. We're trying by all means to comply with that target. But as you understand, and I think the Chief Justice did make it known, that we are facing challenges. Mostly these are infrastructural challenges which the OCJ and the Judiciary is not responsible for. The Department of Public Works and the Department of Justice are the one who are responsible for attending to these problems. Most of the cases that are delayed, you'll find that they are in the magistrate's court, where you'll find the high court sitting as circuit courts. That's where you may find that there are no generators. In some instances, there would be generators, but they are not connected to the CRT machines, which means during the day, during load shedding, there will be lights, but the work cannot be done. And in addition to that, I think we all know that there's been a backlog of reports from the police on forensic analysis. And that backlog has also contributed a lot to finalizing these cases on time. And other problems that we have identified, it was multiple accused in cases or where they changed legal representation. So all the stakeholders responsible do contribute to this delay. But we are striving to achieve this target. There are recent statistics that are being compiled for the quarter ending in December. So that will give us an indication. I hope I have done justice to your question. Thank you.
That's Judge President Tlaletsi, Judge President of the Northern Cape Division. Let me just mention, just in case somebody doesn't know some of us here, this is Justice Petse, the acting president of the Supreme Court of Appeal, Justice Zondi, who is both judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal and chairperson of the Electoral Court, and Judge President Manoin of the Competition Appeal Court, one of the new judges president. But also we've got Judge President of the KZN there. So, and then of course, Justice Dambuza of the Supreme Court of Appeal is acting deputy president. And there is DJP Mpahlele, so there is DJP Ledwaba there. So, and then Judge President Hendricks of the Northwest. So I've got the whole army here. Yes.
Chief Justice, I have two more questions and then I'll shut up, I promise. The first one, Franny reminded me, but at the last to affirm the judiciary's independence. Can you give us an update of what has happened since, and I would like to hear what plans do you have to move this proposal forward and towards finalization. And you mentioned in your presentation today that you attended a judges conference in Uganda. Is there plans to have a judges conference in South Africa for the South African judiciary? And then it's not enough people putting themselves forward for the electoral court, for the labor court, the deputy judge president position, the land claims courts. They struggled to get judges permanently appointed. Judge Cohen and recently appointed judge. It was only one candidate in each round. Is it something of a concern that you're just not getting people to put themselves forward to be judges?
Thank you very much, Mbegazeli. The first question you raised relates to the issue of the institutional independence of the judiciary. As you might recall, in my interview in February for the position of Chief Justice, I did say that that was one of the issues that I really wanted to pursue, and that remains the position. The position hasn't changed much in terms of what is being done between February last year and now. Because in February, the position was that about 10 years previously, the judiciary had presented to the executive its document that indicated the model of institutional independence that the judiciary wants. And all those 10 years or so, the executive had not responded. Actually, the former Chief Justice had given up that there was anything that was going to come from the executive. And what do? All you can do is talk and talk and talk. If they don't have the appetite to advance this project, then you are at a dead end. But having said that, I must indicate that I've had discussions with the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, and he has informed me that very soon they would be, he was telling me towards the end of last year that very soon they would be reverting to us. I had hoped that by now they would have reverted to us. He told me that they needed to do quite some research in order for them to respond. So I think they must have done very thorough research to have taken 10 years. So that's where we are. We've been promised that the executive is going to respond, and we are waiting, and we will deal with the response as soon as we have received it. It's a pity that it's taking so long. Conference, the heads of court have agreed that subject to issues of budget, there should be a conference of judges of South Africa. So there is a committee that we have established which is looking into that, and I think soon they will be updating me on what's happening. So there will be. On the issue of cost in relation to acting judges, of course we don't have control over the purse. We have to persuade the executive that there is a need for money to be spent more on acting judges, for example, when there's backlog that needs to be cleared, and you might need more acting judges than there are. So other than discussions, it's very difficult. You have to discuss and try and show them the need, because ultimately they must say, okay, that's fine. But also, if you talk about Gauteng, for example, and I will let the DJP say something if he wishes to say something. Sometimes the problem, and I think it may arise in the labor court too, is that there is a need actually to have more acting judges than there are posts in which they can act. And sometimes there are practitioners, and sometimes experienced practitioners who are prepared to come and act without being paid. I know a very senior counsel who, when I was JP in the labor court and labor appeal court, used to tell me, around December, I'll act and you don't have to pay me. You people can go and be with your families. I'll do all the cases. But you might find that there might be resistance from the executive if there is no post, you know. So there are those problems. As far as the JSC and the fact that we don't get candidates, that's a matter of great concern to me. It has been for quite some time. As you will know, ordinarily, every judge should be aspiring to get to the highest court in the land, and therefore we should be spoiled for choice. I remember in 2009, when I was one of the candidates for the Constitutional Court, there were about 25 candidates for 4 vacancies, and a lot of them were judges. There were a few who were practicing lawyers, but I think there were no less than 20 judges who made themselves available. Of course, I remember also in 2011, when I got appointed to the Constitutional Court, there were just 4 for 1 vacancy. So if anyone pulled out, we would not have been able to proceed. So some of these problems are not new, but they are getting worse in the sense that sometimes you don't even make the minimum, whereas you should have more. That's a matter that is really of great concern. I believe that the JSC is going to discuss the issue of what it is that results in us not having enough candidates, particularly for the Concord. But obviously we can look at other courts as well, but the problem is more pronounced in relation to the Concord. I hope I've dealt with your questions. Thank you. Maybe the DJP, he might wish to say something. DJP?
Okay. Thank you, Chief Justice. The issue of acting judge, those acting judges, and as the Chief Justice has said, the minister won't appoint acting judges willy-nilly. Those acting judges are appointed to replace the judges who are not available. However, we are thankful to the profession in that they are willing to act on pro bono basis. The example that I can give is that with the workload that we've got, the last week of the term, acting judges would be coming to assist, because the profession is aware that if they don't assist, this causes that the matters should be set down. Even if we may need about 10 judges and they are appointed now, they won't have space. They won't have chambers to sit in. Thank you.
I am going to declare. Well, but there may be some things that you might wish to add to what we have been saying. Do any of you, JP? Oh, they want to see, yeah, okay.
On the question of the stats regarding the magistrates' courts that we are going to deal with, because it's really an embarrassment for them to hear that the mission and the heads of the magistrates' courts and the regional courts, we're having a working relationship and we are discussing some urgent matters. So I don't think this will happen again in
Okay.
the next meeting. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Who are not men, who wish to add something? Nothing? Nothing, okay, all right. Thank you. Mbezeli promised us he was going to shut up. Oh, if it's for them, I agree.
Judge Boyohlati, you know, your province is very vast, KZN, and the High Court is only in Durban and Pietermaritzburg. But we know that there's a lot of complex crime that happens in northern KZN. And perhaps linked to the question of financing, is the division having any plans of reviving the circuit courts that go to KZN, northern KZN for access to justice purposes? Is it something that has been discussed? I'd like to hear more about that.
One in Mtunzini, and then one in Newcastle, Madadeni, and then one in Scottburgh. Scottburgh is just a temporal measure because the Department of Justice, they are behind with their work schedule. We haven't taken a decision about Vryheid, which was the other circuit, but we find that there are not so much of other cases of serious nature that deserve the ones that I have counted. So we are working hard, but the problem, as my brother has mentioned, is the load shedding, because just now we've just finished a session now, and 17th of February, and the reports that I'm getting is that court.
Thank you. With Limpopo, I was talking to one of my judges that we need to revive Lephalale. But unfortunately for accommodation, we are using the courtroom that is being used by the regional court. So Toyando, where there are only 3 judges. So we have to work out, if we take one to Lephalale, then who will do the work of there in Polokwane? Thank you.
And thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody. That's the end of the media briefing. Thank you very much. And civil society.